Hello, hello. Happy Monday. Let's see. I think all of my sounds are okay. Um, it's Monday. How'd Monday get here? So, thanks, Druid. So on Friday, we watched Taking Venice. Hey, Robin. Druid, my darling. You guys were both there. What did you think of the documentary? I think it was pretty good. And it wasn't exactly what I imagined, but I think it was a little more than I imagined. So that was really good. And my first thought for today was to maybe look at some of those artists that came up besides Robert Rauschenberg. We got to see quite a bit of Jasper Johns and his work, so I thought that was pretty cool. We saw a little bit of Clive Oldenburg. And I thought to myself, maybe I could just do a little retrospective of those artists. But I started with the women, and I started with Carolee Schneemann. And if you guys watch the documentary, there's this candid shot, I'm guessing from the 60s, of Rauschenberg. It looks like some kind of event or party. Rauschenberg is standing there. Carolee Schneemann is sitting on his shoulders, and she's completely naked. So I'm like, well, we can't show Carolee Schneemann's work. And I looked at the rest of her work, and indeed, it's a lot of nudity. So we've already gotten a little hand slap here. So I should probably keep it clean for a while. But yeah, I thought it might be fun to look at some of those people soon. And I thought, I should probably dig out my art history book before I just start, shooting from the hip, because inevitably, I get dates and names wrong and stuff. So, yeah, eye-opening for behind the scenes. Yeah, it was really interesting, the rules of the Venice Biennale. And, the Americans were seen as, I guess often as Americans are seen, coming in like all big and loud, and, we're going to do this thing and like get out of our way. And I think that's sort of the impression that the Americans left that year. And I think the one sort of bittersweet thing about it is Rauschenberg, you could see like on his face as he accepted like the prize thing, and he kind of, I'm not sure that he knew. I feel like they had to have told him, but the other people involved, there was like all these characters involved, and the other people knew that he was going to get it. They had pushed for it, and they had gone round and round and round, because the judging committee was like, no, his paintings aren't in the right place within the event, and nobody's ever won the grand prize that hasn't been like in the main area. So yeah, it was such a big deal. There was all this behind the scenes stuff, and I don't know how much of it he was aware of. Like they kind of didn't make that very clear. So I kind of think he was like in on it, like he kind of knew what was happening, like he was a contender, but I think probably he didn't know until the last minute that he actually had won. So he had this very, like, I don't know, I don't want to call it humble necessarily, but he kind of had this reaction that was sort of, I don't know, as deer in the headlights a little bit. And, after the fact, he kind of, I think he kind of was at a little bit of a loss. And so that was interesting to me. I kind of didn't expect that. And I think, my look at Rauschenberg over the past couple months I've learned a lot about him, and he isn't who in my mind I had thought he was. There's just that whole group of guys, very few women, big group of guys, and there's the expressionist, the postmodern expressionist, and then you've got the pop art people, and they merge a little bit. Jasper Johns was more pop art. Rauschenberg was more, of a abstract expressionist. Yeah. So anyway, long story short, I want to look at some of those people again, and I've kind of had this idea, and I'm sure somebody has done it, but I started thinking, as we look at all these people, and particularly the abstract expressionists and the pop artists, Now, some of their stuff, I don't even think you could even get close to quilts with. But some of it is very quilty. And I think it would be so interesting to look at, take a piece of modern art and look at what, and I'm not saying that anything is influenced by anything. I'm not saying like, this is an exact like thing, but look at a piece of modern art and kind of think like, okay, what are its influences in textiles and quilts, and look at that, and then look at that same piece of modern art and what is it influencing in the modern period as far as textiles and art. I think that would be an interesting thing to look at, because of the way that quilts, we've had these revivals of quilts, and quilting is such an interesting art form. Anyway, get there in my head. I had some really interesting conversations with an acquaintance the other day who was talking about liminal spaces. And I don't know if they were just trying to like blow smoke up my butt and make me feel really part of the conversation, but they said something about, quilts are like liminal spaces. And to clarify what a liminal space is, it's a space like where you're sort of in you've left one thing and you haven't quite arrived at another. And it's sort of like being in limbo. And or you're in between things. And they were saying to me that, quilts, liminal spaces aren't necessarily like this horrible limbo space thing, but that quilts are, taking like whole pieces of fabric, reducing them and making them into something else. And that process is liminal because, you have this ending and a beginning, and then the quilt gets used or hung on the wall or whatever, and the quilt becomes kind of ephemeral. Lots of ephemeral things are sort of liminal. So anyway, this person is like way deep into this stuff, and I'm kind of like over my head. I think I'd have to read a little bit more about it. They're talking about writing a paper on it, and I'm like, yeah, I'd love to read that because it's interesting stuff. So, what I want to look at today, I started thinking, I have such an attitude about Valentine's Day. I'm like, it's, I don't hate Valentine's Day. I don't harbor any kind of like ill emotion towards it, but I'm kind of like, had enough of made up holidays. I mean, today, President's Day, again, made up holiday. It's a holiday for furniture sales, white sales, and government workers to have Monday off. So, I think we should have like every Monday should be a holiday, on that token. But I thought, I kind of threw Valentine's Day out the window, but I thought we'd circle back. And, it's February. Let's do some red and white. And, the Infinite Variety show is such a big deal, and it's referenced so very often. And it really wasn't that long ago, comparatively speaking. So I thought that maybe we would soak in that a little bit. I will apologize beforehand. I snapped pictures right out of the book, so that I could just put those up on the screen to show you. And I wish I had such a big, beautiful flatbed scanner like Mary Fons had when she was doing Quilt Nerd, because, you could get nice big pictures. My picture's not that great. So you have to compensate for the fact that it's dark in my house. I have terrible lighting. When I do put lighting on anything, there's glare. So anyway, just manage your expectations. But I have a few things to read, and as much as I know about this show, and unfortunately I didn't see it, wish I could have, I remember hearing about it when it happened. I was actually making quilts then. I was sort of at the very beginnings of sort of a modern quilt, sort of experience, journey, whatever. I didn't quite fit in with modern quilts, but anyway, as I was reading about it and looking at the pictures, I was like, wow, this is so much more than I thought it was. So why don't we just jump in there, and then, depending on time, I had a little Robert Rauschenberg little video that we might look at. It's very tiny. It's not anything big. And then How to Manage a Husband from the English Woman's Domestic Magazine. I still have that, which I think it's very funny, and we definitely have to look at it. But for now, let us look at quilts. So let me get fired up here. Just a minute. Oh gosh, did I close it? I did. Okay. Bear with me. You know, what on earth? Okay. Would help if I went in the right folder, wouldn't it? Here we go. Okay. So, all right, come on now. You open. I know what's happening. Okay. Let us. Okay. Other screen. Oh gosh, I've got so much on this screen. All right. Let me move myself and the chat so you can see everything. All right. Hopefully these pictures will not be too terrible, but obviously this is one of the big front spreads of the book. So a lot of quilts, a lot of red and white quilts. I have pictures of the actual space that we'll see in a minute. And this is actually, let me jump back to me for 1 second. So this is the book. And it is a volume and a half. Look at this thing. Weighs a ton. It's got big, beautiful, glossy pages. My mom gave it to me for Christmas a number of years ago. And let's see, the keyboard doesn't want to stay. All right. So, a couple of facts about this show. So it took place, it was 6 days, only 6 days. And there were 653 quilts. 653 quilts hung for 6 days. I mean, in today, and I really think back in the day, a lot of art exhibits were like this. They only put these shows up for very short periods of time. Today you can count on seeing a show in a major museum, over at least a month or two. And sometimes, like, for the better part of a year, some museums will have these major shows up. But this one was only for 6 days. And I think the circumstances of what brought it together will kind of help you understand why it was only up for 6 days. But it was March 23rd through the 30th, 2011. And I'm like, yeah, I remember where I was in 2011. That's not that long ago. What is that? 14 years ago? So, it was put on by the American Folk Art Museum. And the quilts, so 653 quilts, and they spanned 3 centuries. However, most were 19th century quilts. And that is because the prime period for red and white quilts was 1880 to 1920. So you could imagining that peak. And this, interestingly, kind of coincides a little bit with Crazy Quilts. Crazy Quilts had a similar, they peaked in 1880s, 1884, 1885. So you've got red and white quilts kind of, and if you think about it, this is a major quilting period. So you've just got a lot of people making quilts, riffing off each other. There's a lot of quilts. And think about any trends we see today. You'll see a glut of things. And so I kind of think that's the way it was in the late 1800s. Put on my imagination. That's what I picture. So the show was at the Armory, a specific Armory, 63rd Street Armory, I think. And it is a huge space. So let's look at some of those pictures. Oh, before I forget, this was in the book about turkey red. And talking of, just these ads, looking at the fact that, this special dye, the special fabric. This first ad is from 1788. Turkey red. Mr. Borrell of Blakely takes this method of acquainting his friends and the public in general that he has now entered upon a new plan for the dyeing of that useful color, which he flatters himself to do in such a manner as to merit such favors as may be conferred on him. For terms and conditions apply to the Cock Tavern, Market Street Lane, where there's a proper person appointed to give the necessary satisfaction. Okay, so apparently Mr. Borrell was going to dye stuff red. But it sounds very mysterious. And then below that is a turkey red on cotton, fast to both sun and air, is made by the new Perfection dyes. Bright, even colors that will not wash or scour out are guaranteed. A large package to color 2 to 4 pounds of goods by mail for 10 cents. So this was a big deal because, you know, there are the certain reds, and I think I've talked about this before. There are certain reds that, you know, they wash out or they're not this beautiful red. And so the 1800s and, you know, this proliferation, this availability of this beautiful red color. And that's not to say all of these quilts include turkey red, but turkey red made this possible, essentially. So you see, this is a really cool picture because some of the quilts were mounted not like this, but a lot of them were mounted like this. And they're basically 2 quilts sandwiched. And so you don't see the backs of the quilts, the back side is another quilt. And if I remember correctly, what they did, there are these tubes. They're quite likely the kind of tubes that the quilts are actually rolled on, because many museums will keep their quilts rolled. Flat storage, of course, is, I guess, preferable, you know, because it's completely supporting the quilt. But I think the next best way is to roll it, you know, assuming it doesn't have anything that could be crushed in being rolled. And they're rolled on these tubes that are like archival, you know, paper, whatever, that's not going to harm the textile. So that's like what I think these things are. And they've somehow rigged it so that the quilts are attached to the tubing and then the tubing is suspended. So it's really ingenious. And like, this wasn't just, you know, thrown together by, you know, the volunteers at the museum. They actually hired a company, like an event company, to put this together. So there are a couple of people, several people that are important here. The first one is Joanna S. Rose, and I'm going to read you a little piece about, from her, and then a little piece about her. She's the collector. These are her quilts, by the way. These are all her quilts. 653, all hers. I did not realize that until I got this book, and I was like, what? 653 quilts. She's got tons of other quilts too. This lady, she passed away in 2001 at the age of 90. And so I can't even imagine, like, you know, the liquidation of her collection. I want to say, if I read somewhere correctly, that she had promised, it's like 80 or 90 of these red quilts to the museum, the American Folk Art Museum. I would guess, I mean, these are all really nice quilts, so I would guess a lot of them went, you know, to collections. So yeah, and it's funny because she talks about, as she was collecting these, like, she was collecting these in the 50s. You know, this wasn't something that she just snatched them all up, like, you know, in the early 2000s. And she said, you know, you could buy them for nothing, $5, you know. And sometimes you would buy something in an antique show or a store or something, and they would just wrap your purchase in a quilt. So I was like, oh man, can you imagine? So Joanna S. Rose, important. Joanna Semmel Rose. Elizabeth V. Warren, not to be confused with Elizabeth Warren. She was the Folk Art Museum on the Board of Trustees. And so she was, like, this show was kind of her idea. And I'm going to read a snippet about that. Maggie Gordon, a quilt expert and author. I have at least one of her books. I think she wrote a couple, I think. But I know I have one book by her. And then Stacy Hollander was the senior curator at the time at the Folk Art Museum. So these 4 ladies are influential in getting this going. So I want to read a couple of things to you. And the other interesting thing is Martha Stewart wrote the foreword to this book. And I was going to read it to you, but I skimmed it and I was like, it's kind of got the Martha Stewart, like, ugh. I'm like, because it talks about, oh, I met Joanna Rose on Long Island. Da, 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 da. I'm like, okay, I don't want to read about meeting people in the Hamptons. Okay. So, let's see. I'm gonna wait to read Joanna Rose's selection. I'm going to read Elizabeth Warren and Stacey Hollander's snippets. Now, these are longer essays, but I wanted to read just kind of these few paragraphs from each of them because it's interesting how these came about. So this is Elizabeth V. Warren. You remember she is on the board of directors, or the board of trustees for the museum. So she says, for many years, a thin red and white brochure has been a gem hiding among the thicker volumes of my library. Titled Quilts at Bryn Mawr, and there's a picture of it here, but I didn't take a snapshot of it. And it's nothing to look at, or I'd hold it up. It served as a connection between two things I love, quilts and my alma mater, and Joanna Semmel Rose, the owner of those quilts. Mrs. Rose and I are both alumni of the college, and I had been aware of some of her collections for many years. I borrowed Scrimshaw for Young America, 1986, a traveling exhibition I organized for the American Folk Art Museum. And I had been a lucky guest at her home for alumni receptions, where I had seen some of her treasures in situ. So I borrowed Scrimshaw. So this woman collects other things, not just quilts. In the fall of 2008, I recommended that the museum invite Joanna to speak about quilt collecting at a symposium on textiles. Joanna graciously accepted, and she arrived at the museum with one of the most beautiful 19th century album quilts I have ever seen. As soon as I saw the quilt, I coveted it for the museum's collection, and from time to time, I would write to her gently inquire whether she might be willing to donate the object. My letters went unanswered until one day in January 2010 when Joanna invited me and Stacey C. Hollander, then the museum's senior curator, for lunch. Joanna wanted to do an exhibition of all of her red and white quilts, and she wanted the museum to produce the show. She was not sure how many quilts would be involved. At the time, she thought, there could be as many as 800 in her collection. 800 quilts! Now, this only ended up being 653. Only 653, but I'm just gobsmacked by 800 quilts. And I feel like I've probably got like 100 or I don't know. I've never counted my quilts, but, I'm ballparking 100 and they take up a lot of space. So I can't even imagine 800. And that's just part of her collection. So could it be as many as 800 in the collection? But she told us to start thinking about where and when this extravaganza could happen. No one, except perhaps Joanna, had any idea what we were getting into. By the time we met again at the Rose residence, Stacey had identified a number of possible venues. Joanna declined all of them. None were of the size and scale she had in mind for this exhibition. There was only one place in Manhattan big enough to hold all the quilts. I offered the 63rd Regiment Armory on Park Avenue. That's right, Joanna responded, and here are the dates it's available. The exhibition was to be Joanna's 80th birthday gift from her husband, and in turn, her gift to the city of New York. From the start, she stressed that no admission be charged. The show was to be open to all who wanted to attend. And then she goes on to talk about finding an exhibit designer, et cetera, a lot of stuff. And it's interesting from, for the perspective of, what they describe here in the beginning of the book. Typically essays are going to be about all the importance of red and white and all this kind of stuff. And that is in there. That is in here. But what I really like about this is that they really spent more time on discussing how this show came together. So, Stacey Hollander, remember she's the senior curator. This is the beginning of her essay. And I love this. Imagine Alice in Wonderland sized playing cards. Only the red ones, tossed into the air with joyous abandonment and then frozen in their trajectory upward or down. This was the vision painted in March 2010 for 5 design firms who were invited by the Folk Art Museum, the American Folk Art Museum, to accept a unique challenge: the display of up to 800 quilts of only 2 colors in the exhibition Infinite Variety, 3 Centuries of Red and White Quilts. The museum was no stranger to quilt extravaganzas. In 1986, the museum initiated the groundbreaking Great American Quilt Festival, a huge multi-day event with dozens of vendors, workshops, demonstrations, lectures, and hundreds of quilts displayed simultaneously in multiple themed exhibitions and competitions, drawing visitors from all around the world. And I'm sure you've heard of this, the Great American Quilt Festival, and it should probably be the next thing we look at here, because that was a big deal. That was in 86? Yeah, 86. And in 1992, the museum marked the culmination of a major quilt documentation project held throughout New York State that identified 6,000 quilts and resulted in a publication and exhibition. And that's another major one, the documentation project. In addition, the museum holds an internationally recognized collection of historical quilts and regularly organizes exhibitions that explore aspects of this important and primarily female art expression. And I have been to the Folk Art Museum. I have seen just a handful of their collection. And I mean, they have good stuff. It's a small gallery for their shows and their the stuff they put out, if they're not obviously doing it in this kind of setting. But they're the people that work there sort of have like the impeccable style, The American Folk Art Museum, yes, it's in New York. And I want to say it's like in its 3rd location. It's moved around the city a couple of times. And I'm trying to think where it is now. I'm really terrible with the parts of Manhattan. So, but yeah, it's there. It's kind of, I want to say it's somewhere in the middle of Manhattan. So internationally recognized collections. But this was something else entirely. In both focus and magnitude, the concept of the Red and White Quilt Exhibition represented an opportunity for audiences from every sphere to engage with quilts in an unprecedented way. So that is the beginning of Stacy Hollander's. And then I'm not going to read this, but Tom Hennes, this is where he talks about designing it. And maybe I'll read this one day in the future, but this is where he talks about the, using these pieces of tubing. And oh, thank you, Druid. Okay, Lincoln Square. Wherever that is in connection with everything else. When I went to the Folk Art Museum, I came into Grand Central Station. I walked over, and I walked to kind of around Times Square, and then from Times Square did the hike to Lincoln Square, and I want to say it's like 1.5 miles. But I don't know how that translates into blocks and stuff in New York. But anyway, so this is how this section is really interesting, how they put it together. So let us look. Look at this. This is it. This is that like flurry, this tornado of playing cards. This is what they wanted. And I just think that's so cool. And this is like up in the rafters of the armory, like looking down into this main tube of quilts. And so hopefully you could see from some of the pictures that like this big spiral of quilts is kind of in the middle, and then there's some other pieces hanging. There's the pieces that are flat. So, and then I want to end here before we start looking. I wanted to read Joanna Rose. Okay. So this is her collector's statement for the book. These 653 American quilts from 3 centuries, mostly 19th century, are not the prize winners at fairs, nor ones that have been passed down in families, cherished by several generations. They are rather ordinary coverings, their creators largely anonymous, their provenance obscure, not meant for company beds or best use. I'm sorry, Joanna. I'm sorry to disagree with the dead, but I disagree with you. I do think that they may not have actually won a prize, but some of these quilts are stunning. So they are, for the most part, solid red and white quiltish. Yeah. And hello, by the way. I don't think I said hi to you. Yeah, they're primarily red and white. I want to say there's one or two. Well, there's definitely one in the pictures I took to show you. And then there's another one I don't think I took a picture of where you could kind of see a little bit of a print. But I suspect that well, let me finish reading this. But I suspect that she was really looking for solid red. Like, that's what she collected. So she says, while the Industrial Revolution swept through England in the 1800s and American pioneers pushed ever westward, settling our continent, their women stayed at home, raising children, cooking, cleaning, farming, and often piecing quilts from leftover scraps of material and socializing at quilting bees. Their imaginations took flight in the patterns and variations of traditional shapes. The quilter found her subjects in nature, in the setting sun and feathered star, in the wild goose chase, the garden maze, in lightning, and in the melon patch. In her kitchen, she found models in flower pots and fruit baskets. Oak leaf, pine tree, and hickory leaf are traditional New England themes drawn from the landscape. Burgoyne's surrender came from battle plans in history books. Delectable Mountain derives its name from the passage in John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, which describes the promised land in the settler's mind, the United States. Friendship Baskets is covered with moral and religious maxims. Drunkard's Path is an admonition. Tithing Reel was created to raise money for a Pennsylvania church. When my husband asked what I would like for my 80th birthday, I said something I have not seen before and something that would be a gift for New York City. Seeing all of these quilts at the same moment would be the ideal gift. I did not set out to collect quilts. I have the instincts of a treasure hunter, not a collector. I love that. I think there is something exciting about collecting a series of things, but I have never been one of those, like, gotta catch them all, and so, yeah, like, I look for treasures more than, I look for the series of things, and it sounds like Joanna was the same way. Right, Quiltish? I mean, I don't even know how much it costs to put on the show, and it sounds like the roses certainly must have had some kind of, how do you ask your husband for the birthday gift of a red and white quilt show without him spending money on it? So I don't know how it all worked out, but I suspect the roses put up some money for this. Seeing all of these quilts at the same moment would be the ideal gift. I did not set out to collect quilts. I have the instincts of a treasure hunter, not a collector. I had no clue how many red and white quilts I owned. Okay. They came up at flea markets in the 1950s and sold for $5 and $10, or were often used to wrap purchases. In the later decades of the 20th century came the realization of their originality and graphic beauty. Shows at the American Folk Art Museum and the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York and in smaller cities and towns across the U.S. rekindled an interest in quilts. My visual memory was tested because I never checked to see if I already possessed a particular pattern before acquiring it. And oh boy, she acquired multiples of a lot of the same pattern, but it's so cool to look at the differences. Happily, now, interest in this particular folk art has gone beyond mine, which is about pattern and social history. It includes scholarly studies of textiles, needlework, dyes, and political history. Museums have expanded and professionalized the field, but for me, the fun of finding a treasure, the pleasure of thinking of those 19th century women not doomed to drudgery, but letting their minds and needles wander is sufficient. It is my hope that the show will travel far and wide. Inquiries have come from several continents. As more and more technology expands the world, it narrows mine. But books and paintings and quilts tell me that imagination is alive and well. I am grateful to the American Folk Art Museum, Think Design, they are the ones that actually won the RFP, the Park Avenue Armory, and my husband for making this wild idea a reality. I hope you enjoy the collection. We had a great time assembling it. So without further ado, let's look. Oh, there were more pictures. But yeah, like I said, like this, I think this is the main tornado of quilts. And then there's these smaller circles. And if you look at the way that the guy who wrote the paper on how it was put together, you could see there's like a blueprint. And looking at it from above, there's these series of circles that represent these tornadoes. And then you have the quilts that are displayed flat. Okay. So the book starts off with the striped quilts. And the book is divided into the categories of quilts she had. So I snapped pictures of just really kind of what were my favorite out of each section. So this one, I just, here in the area that I'm in, just south of eastern Pennsylvania, where, of course, Amish and Mennonite influence, they loved stripes. And the stripe, this stripe format often is on the back of quilts. But it's a way that they could take a length of fabric and divide it up and make the most use of it while also, creating something visually interesting. So the number of the bars and their width will tell you like how much fabric they had, what they purchased. And so this is a 4x4, and this is, I guess, depending on how wide these are. Now she has the measurements they have the measurements in the book. Sometimes they have it listed where she obtained the quilt, like it was from New York or was, whatever. But for the most part, all of these quilts just have like maybe an age or maybe not, and the dimensions. So there's not a lot of information about these. So, this very well could have come out of eastern Pennsylvania. And so this was kind of a close-up. And I mean, just look at this quilting. Oh my gosh. And it's probably pretty thick batting, I think. It's pretty floofy batting to get that high relief. This one. Oh my goodness. Stripes, but they're squiggly. And I didn't take a whole lot of time to look at this to see like how is it constructed. I don't know. Oh, but my gosh, look at the quilting in it. It is really hard to tell. I mean, I literally don't see seam lines here, so I cannot imagine that this thing was made with squiggly strips, but it could have been. I just don't know, but I would love to see this in person. I mean, look at big rickrack. Yes, that's exactly what it looks like. But the quilting in here, and notice how the quilting really has nothing to do with this design. It's, the quilting is put in there the way it's put in there. And, it kind of bisects the rickrack. I mean, you kind of would expect, well, I guess that the rounded part of this quilting device kind of fits into this here, but it doesn't really, like the quilting really has nothing to do with the actual piecing of this. And, like I said, I'm so curious to know how this was pieced, but, and it looks to me, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just the glossiness of my book, but it looks like it could be either polished cotton or maybe even silk, but okay. Bricks and stripes. Robin. I don't know that I've ever heard, I know Jinx owe me a Coke, but I don't know that I've ever heard pinch poke, you owe me a Coke. I like that. But look at this, bricks. And then of course we've got the feathered stripes, basically strips of half square triangles. And I think these are called saw blades or something. I can't remember what it's called. Tree Everlasting. It's Tree Everlasting. But I think what's really interesting, and I noticed this all the way through, is the red the predominant color, or is the white the predominant color, or are they balanced? Because you've got a very different look when the white is predominant versus the red. So if you look at these two quilts, very similar. I mean, I almost could see like I think the blocks in this one are smaller. There's more of them. But it's a brick wall. Yeah, Druid, same. But look how different they look when you use the white for the bricks and the red for the grout versus the red for the bricks and the white for the grout. It's really striking. And then this one, it's almost like got a cobblestone look to it because the squares are a little bit wonky, and I don't know if that was their intention. It kind of looks like it wasn't, and it just got that way. So cool stuff. More bricks. And then this, I thought this was cool because this is like it's a split rail fence, which is basically just, the block has the one strip in the middle and then the two strips on the outside. And then depending on how you lay them out, you get this sort of, it looks like a fence. But this is also one of the ones, if you screw up laying it out, you can get a swastika. You can get all kinds of stuff. But I really like how this maker laid this out. And then you have this one that's the same theory, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strips instead of 3. And when they're put together like that, they look like woven. It looks like weaving. Like a two threads, or I can't remember what you call that. Over 2, under 2. Yeah. Now this is Garden Maze. And I've seen Garden Maze set with something in the center of the blocks right there in the middle. Sometimes it can be an embroidery, a pieced piece. Sometimes signatures, and then just the plain ones. And again, look at this. You've got the red with the white or the white with the red. Very different looking. They're very striking. This one also, I loved this. And I think I did a close-up of that one. Yeah. And my big ugly thumb. But look at this. This is like, it reminds me of like Fair Isle knitting. And you can see that this thing is made up of all of these little squares. Even when it's a big, these big blocks, they're still little squares. And if a quilt designer were to design this today, and in fact, I want to say Allison Glass has something that's kind of similar to this. Elizabeth Hartman also, she makes patterns that are, kind of touch on her patterns are all animals. Probably most of you know who she is. But the way that they teach is that, if you're going to have this big block of color here, you don't make that out of, 8. That's 16 little blocks. You don't make that out of 16 little blocks. You just cut one big chunk. And you put it together a little bit differently than you'd put this together. So it's interesting to look at something like this and then think about what we make today. These are called Carpenter's Square. Yeah, Carpenter's Square. And to me, this always looks like, I don't know, it looks so complicated, and I think it kind of is. But it's one of those things, I think, like once you know how it goes together, it's probably just a lot of piecing in each block. But my gosh, look at this one. I mean, these are like what? 49 patch, 7 by 7. And then these are like squares that are sashed more so than, the way this one's put together. So same theory, but very different. And even the execution on this one is just like top notch. Not to say the execution on these other ones isn't great. They are stellar too. But there's just something about the just sheer graphic attitude of this one here versus, say, this one or this other one. These other ones here. Stars. There's a whole chapter on stars. But just to see all of them, and So looked at a lot of star quilts as they pertain to indigenous quilting. Jill and I read To Honor and Comfort by Marcia McDowell. And there's a whole section in there about the star quilts and how they're used by the Native Americans in, I guess it's in Minnesota. No, not Minnesota. I can't remember the name of the school, but essentially basketball teams, and how they give these quilts as gifts to their people in their community, people on their team, and so on. So you see a lot of them when you're looking at, and I was recently at a Marcia McDowell lecture, and so I got to see many pictures of the quilts. But to see these quilts all made in the same colors, all together, it's mind-blowing. It's just a different experience, say, than just looking at like a whole page of, a dozen star quilts that are different colors. Different experience. Now this one, this one is called something. I can't remember. But this is a Delectable Mountains variation. They call it something completely different though. But Dr. Dunton loved this. All the variations of this pattern. And he spent a lot of time looking at, like, what if you changed, the direction that you put some of these half square triangles in, and then, like, what happens if you, by turning them 45 degrees and so on and so forth. But yeah, this is another one that just an impeccable type of design. And it's, I think anything in red and white is just going to be like, it pops out. Here's all your pineapples and your and the feathered stars. Just stunning. And the treatments. I mean, this person, I don't know if this is a striped fabric or if this is something that they made. They pieced that. I don't know. This one has little prairie points on the binding. Okay, this one. I'm frankly tired of looking at this quilt. It's essentially the front cover of the book, is a section of it. I actually took a class on how to make this, and it wasn't too terribly long after this show. It was probably 2012 or 2013 when I took the class. And let me tell ya, that using the modern tools, which includes a strip ruler, a wedge-shaped strip ruler that you can buy it. You can use it for something like this, or you could use it to make like Christmas tree skirts, because it's got like very narrow at one end, much wider at the other end. You put all these wedges together, you're making a circle. So that's what this is. And it is hard enough to piece, and because you're basically piecing like kind of a wedge of, of these, and then you have to cut it down, and then you have to match it up with a pieced section that's like the opposite. So if you start with red at the top of one, you got to start with white at the top of the other one. And I can't remember how many wedges are in here. It's a lot. But I learned how to do it again with a ruler, with a thing, and a tool, a rotary cutter. And all of this applique on the outside, just forget about that. I mean, that's complex enough. But it is so hard to get all of these points lined up, because as soon as you have a point that's off kilter, it ruins this optical illusion. So, as much as I hate this quilt, and I don't hate it, I just have seen it so much. I'm kind of like, bleh, I want to see another one. But it is truly a masterpiece. Just forget about the fact that it makes this really cool optical illusion, but just matching the points all the way down to that tiny size. And I want to say it's late 1800s. I think they've just got kaleidoscope quilt on it. They don't have a date. But I want to say it was late 1800s or 1900-ish, if I'm remembering correctly. So, again, you're talking about a person that maybe had some paper, pencil, might have used a string, to lay things out. They didn't have the tools we have today. They didn't have a computer. They didn't have all the things. So, I'll stop going on and on about this quilt, but it really is a tour de force. And that they made this thing, and that it lays flat, because that's the other thing. Once you get down here into this itty bitty stuff, you got something that doesn't want to lay flat. You've got lots of seams that are very close together and overlapping each other. So, yeah, it's something else for sure. The Carolina lilies. I like Carolina lily for some reason. And of course, you've got bear's paw and stuff. But I love this idea of flip-flopping the colors. So instead of just having all of these Carolina lilies popping out of a white background, you've got white Carolina lilies popping out of this red, and then, just this background. And the background itself makes a really interesting negative space based on the fact that this block, the bottom of this block is white. So it's kind of like it's whacked off. So you get this really interesting negative space. Yeah, absolutely, Robin. I mean, we often sit there and even though we know it's not true, we will still fall prey to the, oh, bless her heart, she's this hardworking farm woman who quit school in the 8th grade. And that's not true. So many of the women, they certainly may have been, mothers, wives, homemakers, pioneer women doing all the things, but they weren't necessarily ignorant. They may or may not have had schooling up to a certain point. They are often autodidacts. There's stories. Sarah Hale, remember Sarah Hale basically, picked up on her brother's education to educate herself. So absolutely, these women could definitely have had, education and understanding of mathematics, either through their own study or through somebody else, making, books and knowledge available to them. And, when you think about the fact that people at this time, they didn't have all of the other things clogging up their attention. They didn't have TV. They didn't have radio. They didn't have computers. They basically had books, magazines, and newspapers, and their neighbors and friends. And so they could devote so much more brain power, because I would say that the management of everyday duties in a home might be hard at first, but particularly if you've grown up managing a home, whatever it is, washing clothes, cooking in a cast iron stove, like all that kind of stuff, it becomes like muscle memory. It just becomes labor at some point. So your brain can work on stuff. Wonder if they made it in narrow strips or in circles. That's a good question. Because the modern way to make this is to piece bars and then cut them. So, you're cutting out this wedge. And maybe that's what they did. Or maybe not. I really don't know. And without any provenance on this quilt, I don't know that. I've seen it a lot, but I really don't know that there's any kind of history on this quilt to know, even who made it, much less how they made it. I guess if you looked at it, you could probably tell, if this circular piecing, or if it's pieced this way. Yeah. I feel like 6 one, half dozen the other. I think making circular pieces would probably be crazy making, although you have, because of the bias, you have like a little bit of wiggle room maybe to get those points, but then you run the risk of things not keeping it flat. So it's really kind of a mystery unless you could get up close, and maybe not even then really be able to see what's going on. Okay. This one's the palm leaves, and I don't know, this one might be like a variation, but it's essentially like the same kind of little pointy pieces. All of the trees. She had so many trees. And, again, I think a while back we looked at trees, and there's so many different types of tree, of this type. You know, it's a trunk and often like a big kind of hunk in the middle. And then you've got all the half square triangles. Or they're not really even half square triangles. They're 60-degree angles, I think. So and they're not equilateral. They're, oh God. See, I have no understanding of geometry. Not true, but I've forgotten it all. But the point I'm making here is how different each of these looks, because the patterns that were used were a little bit different. And, you know, like, you know, how they put it together. I didn't get a good picture of this one, but this one is another like very tiny little triangles to make these 4-directional things. More trees. Oh, and this one's upside down. So also these things over here, again, like tons of triangles. We're going to see lots more. Oh, okay. We're going to see some other lots of triangles, but these reminded me of like life preservers or something, or like cushions, couch cushions. I thought those were really interesting. And I don't know that I've seen that layout. You know, it's the trees with their trunks coming into this point, so they don't even look like trees anymore. Baskets. And of course, this kind of layout with baskets, I love the flip-flop of the color versus like this type of layout where, you know, it's just the baskets on a light background. And I didn't even get pictures of these. I mean, look at these itty bitty little baskets making little wreaths with them. So charming. Schoolhouses. I love the little houses. I think they're great. Just adorable. And again, you know, you can put these blocks, you know, put them together with no sashing and they just melt into each other. Or you can do, you know, more complex sashing so that, you know, around the houses so that you get something that looks more like this. Gosh, if you guys remember, for those of you that used to watch Quilt Nerd with Mary Fons, there was at the Iowa Quilt Museum, which her mother lives next door to, they had a quilt, an exhibit, I want to say it was in 2022, or no, it was 2023, I think, summer-ish, of schoolhouse quilts, or house quilts. It was from Julie Silber's collection, and I just, I of course didn't go there, but I saw it twice, and the quilts are just, I mean, to die for. I love them. And I want to say Julie had one of them. I think she had one of them at a seminar this past year. So I did see one in person. Now look at this one. This one has a church. I've never seen that before, but we're going to see it again in these quilts. And look at its little steeple. And then I don't know what these things are. I guess just to take up some space. They were the windows of the houses. We've got sailboats, airplanes, spools or bow ties. And then this one is the lady at the spinning wheel. I didn't take a picture of that, but again, another very familiar quilt. You know, Emma Andres, I think. Now, you know, I love words on a quilt. Typically, words on quilts were names or biblical things. This one's interesting because these are names. So B-E-R-T, Bert, Inda, I-N-D-A, Mina, M-I-N-A, Ella, E-L-L-A, Will, Alva, Sally. My guess is Sally probably spelled her name S-A-L-L-Y, but Dora, Mary, John, Netta, Andy, Bess. I just love it. Belle. I don't know what this one is. Zell. I don't know. Omer. So yeah, very cool. And then this one is, of course, part of the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. These are two more. Charles and Cornella and Daniel and Amarilla. And I'm fairly certain we may have looked at one of these or some similar ones on Quilt Nerd a really long time ago. But imagine, can you imagine sleeping under one of these things? These are, of course, presentation quilts, not meant to necessarily be slept under, but even as a presentation quilt, like, wow, that's like a billboard, you know? Let me go ahead and throw a billboard over the back of the settee when people come over, like, a little crazy. But there's clearly this vision for these makers, right? This one I just love so much because, again, you've got that just striking, like, eyeball popping red. And it's funny because I'm seeing it on my screen much larger than what I can see on the screen that's streaming to you. And tiny backed up, you can see the roundness of the pattern, you know, what it's meant to create. But up close, it just kind of looks like a tossed pattern. In fabric design, like little things, like little flowers and things when they're just kind of random, it's called a tossed pattern, or a ditzy pattern. And that's what this looks like to me, you know, up close, but then from a distance, you see how it came together. These are the chimney sweep slash friendship quilts. You typically would have signatures here in that middle section. But I wanted to make the point of, like, look how these can be put together to look totally different. And then you, of course, have the color, kind of the color switched one that it just pops off the page. And as I mentioned, this is why it's so fascinating that she didn't keep track of what she was buying. You know, I'm sure there's collectors out there that are like, well, you know, I already have one chimney sweep quilt. I don't necessarily need another. But she had at least 4. I think there might have been another one on the other page. And look how different all of them look. Absolutely different. So it's okay to buy multiple ones. This is a close-up of, I think, what the next one is. But this is a double Irish chain. But I think I took the picture because of the stitching. And I can't tell. I think it's all hand stitched. I'm not positive. Some of this looks like it could be machine stitched in here. It's got this black, looks like black thread. But then some other pieces in here, I'm not sure. So I kind of wondered about this one, you know, how it was quilted. Huh. Well, I don't know where its original is. Well, I guess we'll run across it. Sometimes stuff doesn't upload on the right order. This is a Jacob's Ladder variation. And I love this one because, again, it's another one depending on how you put it together. I worked on a quilt for a Quilt Folks Foundry project. I did a hand quilting on it. And it's funny because it's so easy to turn one of these the wrong way, like when you put it together, or turn elements of it the wrong way. And that was an issue with the quilt. It was a top that I quilted. You know, and I kind of wonder, maybe that's the reason why they never quilted it, because they put it together and they realized, crap, I made a mistake. I don't want to take it out. So, but this is what that looks like when it's perfect. Oh my gosh, the triangles. I mean, can you imagine? I've obviously seen quilts in shows, and in museums that use these proliferation of just half square triangles. And the look that you can get, you know, when it's scrappy versus, in this case, 2-color, it's very different. Your eye does different things. The churn dash / monkey wrench. This one is, it's the scale of the pieces that makes this one interesting. And the colors, because you can see, like, it doesn't have a center. So, like, these pieces, I don't want to say it's an optical illusion, but I think it doesn't pop out necessarily as the monkey wrench / churn dash right away. While these are very recognizable. I thought this was fun. With, I mean, just like all the things. This person was like, well, I want to do stars, but I also like doing feathered things, but I sort of like blocks. I'll just do all of it. This I thought was another really fascinating negative space. And this is kind of a delectable mountains kind of influence here that you can see. And it's really about the quilting in this. I think when they pieced these, they were like, all right, I got to have this big middle, this big negative space because I'm going to do this quilting. So that's also another consideration when you look at these quilts, like what, was the quilting meant to be the star of the show? Was the piecing meant to be the star? Are they meant to be balanced? This one is a unnamed octagon pattern. But if you look at the way it's put together, it's these, triangles that have their ends, the other color. And it's sort of how Hearts and Gizzards goes together. It's kind of a Hearts and Gizzards block, even though Hearts and Gizzards has rounded pieces versus these sharp corners. This is another one, the piecing is secondary to this quilting, but the piecing is also quite beautiful. Also, piecing is not turkey, or the pieces are not turkey red because you can see how they bled. So this is more of like a madder color, like an oxblood color. So definitely not turkey red. This, oh my gosh. So very striking. This sort of bullseye, sort of like the echo. When I saw this, I was like, oh man, that looks like Jasper John's stuff, even though his targets were round, but still got that like pow, Roy Lichtenstein kind of stuff. This, oh my gosh. They could not decide what they wanted to do, so they did it all. This sort of orange peel / honeybee kind of thing going on, these feathered things, the Ohio Star, like it's just a confection and very red forward. This is another one. I think they were sort of, I don't know what they were doing here. This appears to be a block that was put together incorrectly. And I'm not sure what was happening there, but it's really interesting to look at. It's definitely got an interesting vibe. And how these, the arms of these stars just, they vibrate. I think that this would not be as successful of a quilt if these were like solid, because then you'd really notice the fact that this is messed up. But the fact that they're vibrating, it's like you don't even notice the fact right away that these two blocks are not right. Polka dots. There is a quilt, I want to say it might be at Sturbridge Village. And it's quilted in polka dots. Like the quilting is polka dots. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what if one of these was quilted as polka dots? That would be so cool. I don't think any of them are, but still, I don't know whether some of these might be applique or piecing. I think we've probably got a mix of both, but just so stunning, and definitely pop art influence. And oh gosh, there's the Japanese artist. I'm sure you guys know who I'm talking about. She puts polka dots on everything. It's right on the tip of my tongue. So here we have Hearts and Gizzards as it's actually made. You can see another one down here. Drunkard's Path. It's a pattern I love because of how different it looks depending on how you put it together. And then these kind of variations that it's like a curve on the corner, for lack of a better terminology. I don't want to say it that these are a variation. Yes, thank you. Yayoi Kusama. That's exact. I was thinking, Yayoi? Is it Yayoi? Yes, that's who. Um, hey, Leah, how are you? Hearts and gizzards. Got to make you wonder if she was cleaning a chicken. Exactly. And hey, Aina Maker. I got your email. I will get your goodies out to you ASAP. Another one, they're like, I want to do stars. Ooh, but I want to do Drunkard's Path. I'll do both. Oh, look at that. Again, like you got these creative people that are just like, well, ooh, I'm a little tired of making these blocks. Leah, I hope you're doing well. I know back at seminar you had some challenges, and I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon. This one is it's a snake, something snaky. I think I cut it off at the bottom, but it's like a, oh my gosh, I know. I hope you're doing much better. But yeah, this is like a snake situation. So you've got this Drunkard's Path kind of thing with the little points. Oh, just fantastic. Double wedding ring, my favorite. I mean, let's just put it this way. They're all my favorite, except the ones I've specifically said I'm tired of looking at. We got some really incredible robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of layouts here. I can't remember what this is actually called. But I mean, we've talked about that, the methodology of robbing Peter to pay Paul before, of flip-flopping the color. And this one seems like they could have been made by the same person, or it just happens to be that pattern. And it's been flip-flopped in a way that they've just looked very different. Wheels, these wedgie wheel ones, gorgeous, and again, like when you break out like the block itself, how did they piece it? Oh, kaleidoscope. Oh my gosh, this is such a fantastic quilt. I want to make one of these. It's on my bucket list. They're all straight edges. Well, I think the little device in the center is not actually straight. They're kind of curved, but it makes, it's the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. You know what I mean? And more of them, and then look at these two. I didn't really take a picture of this, but like she bought virtually the same quilt. Like it's exactly the same. Now we're getting into the applique quilts. And this, there's, I'm not sure whether, I want to say each block is 4 of these heart-shaped things put together. And that is so very striking when you look at it. I thought this one was fun. The daisy appliques. I think that's a summer quilt, a summer spread. This, a confection. You guys know I love applique, and this is just visually beautiful. This applique section actually had a lot of, it has a lot of Hawaiian quilts in it. So either Joanna Rose went to Hawaii or she had some kind of connection where she picked up a bunch of Hawaiian quilts. This one kind of reminds me of that other one that had the really vibraty kind of star pieces, just because these little sprigs, these little baskets full of sprigs kind of remind me of that. And it's very like, you don't have the same thing in every corner. This is consistent. This is not. Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I have never made a 2-color quilt that's very big. I've made a few things that are smaller, like lap quilt size, because, yeah, it does get boring. when I was doing my Mary Wither wax blocks, which I'm getting ready to pull back out because I'm getting ready to put them together, there was a few people that were doing the original red, white, and green that the Mary Wither wax quilt was made of. And while it's stunning, it's beautiful, I was just like, oh, I can't just do like 3 colors. I gotta have like every color of the rainbow. So this is an Oddfellows quilt because of the chains. That's an Oddfellows device, as well as the heart and hand. And there's all this other stuff like crossed axes, crossed keys. I think they're all those society type of things. And then this, I don't know what this is here. I've always thought it was an animal, but then I look at it and I'm like, I don't know if it's an animal or not. But I just love these quilts that have kind of all of this stuff in them. And I think there's sort of a method to the madness. That's a little beehive, a little bee skep. Very cool stuff. I loved this page. So up here we have just chains. And we can guess this is Oddfellows. You know, the 3 links are typically going to be Oddfellows, but you know, I don't know. Maybe it was, I'm sure it's Oddfellows. This one, this donkey, now we've seen Giddy Up, and Ararat, the donkey and the elephant, but this guy, totally different than Giddy Up. Giddy Up is made of blocks and triangles. This guy's a little bit more like a, you know, like a more lifelike drawing. And then this over here is a bolster cover and this piece. Prairie points all the way around it. All of this beautiful wild applique. I mean, you've got cats, you got horses, you got anchors. These ping pong paddle things that might be fans, maybe. Hearts, moons. It's like just a, yeah, it's symmetrical though busy. It's like the Lucky Charms quilt. It's just got all the things. There is a laundry basket quilt that kind of reminds me of this. And it's been in my to make basket forever. But it's like it's a whole cloth and then you applique like all this stuff all over it. And it's, you know, many of these same kind of little pieces. And I know it's based on something historical. I don't think it's like a copy of anything historical, but it's based on these kind of quilts with all of these different shapes. So yeah, another one I'm going to make one day, you know. I'm going to have to come back as a ghost and quilt because, you know, I don't have enough lifetime left to make all the quilts I have planned. This is just a close-up of this. I mean, how beautiful is this? I think that was just another close-up. I was obviously enamored with this. This is just, I don't even know what to say. It's everything. I don't know why I love it so much other than, I mean, it's these funky looking unicorns with swans and this rooster or chicken thing. And then you have down here these horses that have stuff written on them. So this says Palo Alto. This says, I think, postcard. J something. I don't know. I'm really not sure what all this is. You just sometimes kind of have to guess, like, what were they writing this stuff for? There might have been some more more information on this one, but yes, it does look like heraldry. That looks like what their intent was. You know, but again, just, it's so visually striking and slightly odd, which is, you know, that's my jam. Now, I love this one because princess feathers, of course. We look at lots of things with princess feathers, but I like this one at the top because it's like kind of like princess feather. I don't know that I've ever seen such straight princess feathers. Usually they're curved, as you can see this one here. So this one was kind of like, princess feather. This one, oh my goodness. This is Adeline C. Jordan, Wallkill, Orange County, February 18th, 1858. And she did all this paper cutting. Pretty, pretty stuff. Now these are the actual Hawaiian quilts. This one I thought was just really pretty because this one has like more of a folk art look to it, almost like a stamp, like a carving, kind of like that sort of thing, versus this really intricate stuff that they also do on Hawaiian quilts. This one I thought was so neat. It says aloha, and then has this like five armed vine in the middle. The signature quilts. We're getting close to the end here. So many signatures on this quilt. So if this one, let's see, just says Pinwheels quilt. If this was a fundraiser, I've read, the fundraiser quilts often, they, for these ladies auxiliaries and stuff, they would almost like compete with each other to see who could get the most signatures in their blocks. So I don't know if that, this is a person that just did real well, or what the point behind this was, but it's so interesting. And it looks to me like it's probably all the same handwriting too. So this might have just been a documentation of people in this community or something. And I told you we were going to see another steeple. This one is amazing, obviously because of all the signatures, but then notice you've got some kind of oddball shapes. Like, I don't know, this random shape up here. This one looks like just the piecing of the church itself ran into the house, but very neat. And like, I had never, until I saw it in this book, I had never seen the schoolhouse with a church, and now there's two of them in the book. Another one with a bunch of weird shapes. Like some of it, like that's a bell. You've got somebody's initials here. It's kind of just a big mishmash. This appears to me to be the kind of thing like might have been like a girl's quilt, a teenager or a young woman that made this, because it is more spare. It looks like it's just a top to me. I don't know that it's been quilted at all. It may be tied, but I don't see any ties in it. So yet another one. It's got some of these devices, the keys, the cross swords, the links, the hand, the scissors, the anchor. Again, these are all these men's societies kind of things. Kitchen choppers. Yeah, I like just interesting. So the cross, this one, I mean, it just appears to me this is like a community's worth of things that are documented. Maybe a fishing community, and they are Christians, and there's probably some men's, the Masons and the Oddfellows, got all that. This is wild. This is the Hudson River Dayline Auxiliary. So just a crap load of embroidery. It's all this red work. So American Red Cross, yeah. Just so much stuff in here. 1918. So I've never been a real big fan of red work, but they're always fun to look at these, Now this one, this one does not visually interest me much, but the reason I included this one is because these are Pan American blocks. This is from the Pan American Exposition, and they sold these, they're called penny blocks. And so they sold these that were pre-printed with the different attractions or the different things. Like, I don't know that they built a Taj Mahal at this thing, or the Colossus. But whatever, that you had all these things that are kind of emblematic of, the sites of this event. And so you could get all these, embroider them, put them together. And then, you've got this quilt. the one that I have seen had different stuff in it. Some of these things I recognized, but it also had, there was apparently this upside down house that was at this event. And the other quilt, the other Pan American quilt I've seen, has like 2 of those blocks in it. So it's obviously the kind of thing, like, I guess either you bought a package of them or you picked them out, the ones you wanted or whatever. But, you know, a really interesting thing, a little interesting bit of history that's documented right here. And this is why quilts are interesting, because they are documentation of things that happened in our world. Now, I don't like red work, but I love this because this is weird. It's got so much going on. Some of this stuff seems to me like it might be like from an illustration that they've copied. Other things, you know, all these birds and animals are probably from some type of illustration. Oh, look at that. There's an armadillo. A kiwi. That's a little kiwi. A flying squirrel. I mean, there's so much stuff to look at in here. There's ostriches up here. Or emu or something. Just like whose crazy brain did this come out of? I just love it. So fascinating. You can see I just took some close-ups here of chickens. All these people. I love those ostriches or emus or whatever they are. That's a hippopotamus, I think. Or no, I don't know. That's a hippo. And then this one, unfortunately, they don't have a very good picture of it in the book, but it's different than the one we just looked at. And I suspect it might have been made by the same person, potentially. Unless this was truly a trend among a community or something that was doing this. Also, good record of clothing. Absolutely. Yeah. So if we know the time period that these were traced from, you know, we get these, these sort of realistic impressions. Men had very long beards at this time. Okay. This one. Now, here's an example. Tish, you asked. This one is an example of a fabric that had a print. And they're very few and far between, but this one had this really sparse polka dot. And I love it. And I think that this is just a generic sailboat pattern. However, during the Depression, the WPA project in Milwaukee had a very similar pattern, sailboat pattern that they used to for the women that were working in the workshops to create. And they were using them for like children's hospitals and orphanage kind of like places, just to make things, little blankets and curtains and things that would be cheerful. So there was a blue and white quilt, and I believe our dear friend Mary Kay has one of those blue and white sailboat quilts. But that every time I see this pattern, that's what I think of. But I think this is just a generic, might have been in the newspaper kind of pattern. I'm certain that I've seen newspaper patterns like this. I think this is towards the end of the book. These are the children's quilts or lap quilts. This big old thing is, I'm assuming this is stuffed applique because it does look kind of lumpy. But it's unquilted. They've done this dense quilting around it. So it could just be making it pop. But I suspect maybe they stuffed a little extra in there to make it puffy. And then look at this, these random shapes, like just, like just applique them down. And then of course the alphabet. This is definitely a baby quilt. This is probably a baby quilt with the stars and these little cross things. And then I believe this is the last quilt that's in the book. And this is a Dear Jane reproduction. So you probably know what Dear Jane is. But if you don't, it is it up in Vermont? You guys, all of you probably can access the name of the museum better than I can. Actually, I might have one of their brochures right here. But the quilt itself, the original quilt, has all of these little flag shapes are pieced The corners are pieced. Everything is pieced in it. So this is a more spare representation of the Dear Jane quilt. Everybody and their brother has started a Dear Jane quilt. My mother included. I have pieced a couple of the tiny little blocks, and these are like, they're tiny. They're itty bitty little, like 3 or 4 inch blocks. Well, no, they're not 3 inch. They're probably 4 inch blocks, maybe 4 or 5 inches. They're tiny. I had started, yes, Brenda Papadakis. Yep. And then locally, well, in Virginia, there's a woman that had done a lot of breaking this down. And there's literally like I want to say that I have the Brenda Papadakis book. Is she the one that, I'm trying to remember, is she the one that had the CDs, or is that somebody else? In any event, there's Dear Jane is like a whole, okay. Dear Jane is kind of like the, I don't know, it's like the cult quilt that everybody wants to do. And there's a whole story. Yes. Paper Pieces. Yes. I think Paper Pieces has had, I think. Yeah. It was definitely a real following probably about 10, 15 years ago. And I just feel like it's one of those things that's probably, it's high times for there to be another Dear Jane explosion. I know every time they take it out of storage and show it, it gets a lot of, a lot of buzz and stuff. So Martingale republished the book right after they went out of business. Or right before they went out of business. Oh, that's a bummer that they went out of business. That still makes me mad. But yeah, look at this. Look at this. And having done it in 2 colors, because the Dear Jane quilt is multicolored. I wouldn't necessarily call it scrappy, but yeah, it kind of is scrappy, I guess. So, and this is just some random one. Oh, this is the one where I showed you the quilting earlier on it, and for some reason, yeah, this was the double Irish chain. You saw the quilting earlier. And that is the end. So that took much longer than I expected it to. All right. Well, we're not going to have time to get into how to manage a husband. We'll have to do that next time. But I did want to get, and it's still, we're still probably not going to finish it, but I wanted to read more of The Heritage of Cotton. I'm sad. Look, guys, we don't have much left. And where I left off in this, because this is his whole chapter on research, and it's been quite long. And we still have, let's see how much more we have to go. And we still have a bit more to go. And he's got a whole conclusion as well. So, yeah, I think we'll be able to finish this by Thursday. So, all right. So, without further ado, we are reading The Heritage of Cotton by M.D.C. Crawford. We are on chapter, I just looked at it and I should have made note. I think it's chapter 14. Yes, chapter 14, research. So I think I'm going to go back a little bit just to remind myself what we're working on here. Yeah, so we left off with some of the Hoover administration stuff, the elimination of waste in industry, all that kind of stuff. So, let's see, and he's talked about the attacks of disciplined and organized labor on the cotton mills. Yeah. And so he says, if the progress of the last 10 years is any guide, the cotton industry is oriented towards some rational form of industrial democracy. Well, Morris didn't know what he didn't know. So we continue. With extreme reluctance, I leave the discussion of these problems, which I have only suggested. They are of vital moment. Yet, since they have already been raised and are now under consideration in all sections of the country, I feel it wiser to devote the remainder of this chapter to a field of research only just beginning to attract serious attention. Ooh. If I have not suggested in this narrative that the history of cotton is the history of a series of great artistic achievements, If I have not proven that the basis of its very existence over long centuries of commerce and invention has been the history of beauty, then I have marshaled my facts with poor generalship. And that's the interesting thing about Morris, is he always has like sort of flowery things to say. And remember how he, like in the beginning where he was talking about weaving, and he basically called the woven fabric a web. So he's got this sort of, I think, like flowery idea of a romantic idea of cotton and fiber. The mere coincidence that the cotton fiber lends itself almost perfectly to mechanical production does not alter these facts in any way. The world did not tire of beauty because a few machines happened to be invented and perfected by one single people in the long histories of this great fiber. The next chapter in the story of cotton will be written by the artist designer. He is almost a new figure in this industry, but the scene is set and the audience waiting for his appearance. Surface design, right? Let us admit with candor that the great bulk of so-called textile designs, not alone in cotton but in all fabrics, not alone in America but in England, have been mediocre in artistic merit for at least 50 years. So remember, this is 1924. There is no need to go over the dreary reasons for this condition. It is enough to write that the problems of conquering the machines, the development of world commerce, and the extremely delicate human adjustments to the new philosophy of automatic productive forces were gigantic tasks. A century and a half is, in point of fact, a very short time to allow for even their partial solution. With a few honorable exceptions in England and America, most of our designs have been obtained in one way or another from France, particularly Paris. In no sense do I mean to belittle the artistic achievements of a gallant and appreciative people when I write that the supremacy of France in the fields of decorative art is in a measure the result of her political exigencies during the 18th and early 19th century. Well, we know what was going on then. Let's see, is he going to get into the French Revolution or what? With the Great Industrial Revolution, when the Great Industrial Revolution began in England with Kay's fly shuttle in 1733, France was at the brink of a series of national blunders and disasters which almost broke her spirit. Oh my. Oh my. It's so funny, in terms of the history. I mean, this is early 20th century, and there's so much more that hasn't happened yet that Morris doesn't know about. So it's really interesting to read this from his perspective. Oh yeah, right. The fabrics from France from the early part of the 19th century could never be accomplished in America. Absolutely. I mean, that's the gist of this book we read. Leah, I don't know if it's been a while since you've been around, but we read the Chintz book. And I got to tell you, MacIver Percival, what an interesting guy. He and Crawford and, Ruth Finley, we read about Sarah Josepha Hale also. And I just think, yeah, to get the bunch of them in a room, oh my gosh, it would be so great. Where did I leave off here? When English manufacturers were perfecting machines and systems of mechanical production, France, bankrupt and ringed with foes, willed that kings should die. Oh, yes. The year that Eli Whitney's genius gave to our South her great plantations of cotton saw France, mad with terror, strike at her nearest foe. And while mills were springing up beside the turbulent rivers of New England, the steel-tipped legions of France followed the brilliant Corsican victorious against a world in arms. After the Napoleonic incident followed the patient, bitter years of Reconstruction, and it was not until after the Commune in 1850 that France began to take again her place in the industrial and commercial world. The age of the machine had grown in stature, and France had spent her energy in other channels. She faced a world gone mad over whirling machines and vast forces of productive energy. She had only her craft guilds, a tradition of honest workmanship, and a love of beauty as her salvation. She had never exchanged the artisan for the mill hand, never subordinated the artist to the mechanical director. Her small, personally supervised workshops, filled with her skilled craftsmen, proud of their dexterity, were more flexible mediums for artistic creation than the great mills of her sister democracies. The traditions of beauty that had grown up under the great Italian masters from the stormy times of Francois I, she had never lost even in her darkest hours of struggle. And so the world came to Paris in a stream of gold for the work of her masters. And France was wise, for no specious pleas from the advocates of serial production ever won her from her firm position. She kept her craftsmen and only experimented in a cautious manner with the machine. She gave security and honor and high rewards to her successful artists in all fields. She built schools and academies, workshops and museums to the end that this creative fertility might live and prosper. England and America, and indeed the entire industrial world, fed their hungry machines with the ideas that first saw perfection in France. So long as France created, the machines could not become sterile for ideas. France, for almost a century, had been the world's studio. If any valiant and patriotic manufacturer of fabrics in England or America doubts this statement, let him study the list of professional buyers of style merchandise who sail on almost every steamer to the ateliers of Paris, or look at the labels on merchandise in Bond Street shops. Not so much anymore. If any lay reader believes these statements too strong in regard to cotton fabrics, they have but to go into the nearest department store and ask to see the cottons of M. Paul Rodier, artistic heriter of the great craft ages and international merchant. What department store today would have heard of M. Paul Rodier? Then came the Great World War I, and France gave every ounce of her energy, every atom of her power to divert disaster. World War II, of course, has not happened yet, but we also know what happened there. Her craftsmen became poilus. Her masters gave their genius to munition making and the 1,001 grim concerns of war. At once, and honestly, I don't think France really... much like England, I mean, they still struggled. So much of World War I was, in that region. I think that they probably never truly reconstructed by the time World War II rolled around. Although I'm not a scholar of this, so anybody who has anything to chime in with, feel free. At once, the world's machines felt the interruption of life-giving ideas. Manufacturers all over the world soon learned the lesson that merchandise is purchased on its artistic merit rather than its physical qualities. Maybe. In 1915, we felt this lack very keenly in America. E.W. Fairchild, publisher of Women's Wear, a daily paper with a national circulation to the retail stores and costume manufacturers in America, asked me if some means might not be developed here to fill the gap. There was no time to develop any complicated organization to build solidly from experimental beginnings. What was needed was swift action. Now, you remember... Crawford worked for Women's Wear Daily, and I want to say that E.W. Fairchild was responsible for him actually writing this book. He was, he supported Crawford's work. What was needed was swift action. Albert Bloom, treasurer of the United Peace Dye Works and a partner in a great Lyon dye house, was called into consultation. He at once agreed to the seriousness of the situation and placed his time, energy, and prestige at the disposal of any plan that remotely promised success. Two great questions at once arose. Did America possess in its museums the collections of decorative arts essential as inspiration to designers? Well, did we ever? Yes, we did. Was there in America adequate talent to reinterpret this material into acceptable designs? Well, it's only 1924, but come a few years, we're going to have the WPA, and the artists and designers are going to come out of the woodwork. And yes, they were very good. The first question was easily answered. Our museum collections were adequate and accessible. More than this, the directors of our great museums in New York City and Brooklyn were more than anxious to assist us to any degree. In many instances, they anticipated our requests, and in all cases, they had prepared long in advance of any sign of industrial interest. Our museums offered their collections and still offer them to the industry with greater freedom than any museums in the world. And I would say that's probably still the same. Obviously, museums like to be paid. So if they offer up or they allow someone to request, I kind of don't think any museums are offering things up anymore. It's more like people are going to the museum and requesting things. I would say museums mostly, for the most part in the U.S., they are happy to have their collections utilized as inspiration. The Getty has put it out there here's all of our stuff. It's free to use. Make stuff with it. Other museums are yeah, you could certainly use this. You just have to pay us royalties. So there's that too. The next question was not so easily answered. For generations, our designers had been discouraged. Textile pattern making was regarded as the lowest and worst paid of all the arts. Quite properly, our art schools almost totally ignored it, since it offered absolutely no field for ambition. England was a little better, perhaps, but only to a degree. Some mills had small staffs of ill-paid copyists or hack designers. There were a few commercial studios that produced painted bits of paper about as inane and original as tomato can designs. Tomato can designs? That's wild. Okay, this is 1924. 1966? That is an absolute shot in the dark, but guess who was making paintings and prints with tomato cans? And interestingly enough, he didn't just make prints with them. There was a whole tomato can and Coca-Cola display that's more of a sculpture that Warhol made, and I think it's in the New York Museum. So yeah, yes, foreshadowing, Anon Maker, yeah. That is interesting, yeah. What can be more inane and unoriginal as a tomato can, a tomato soup can? I love that. Was there then, in spite of this colossal and wasteful indifference and neglect in all this broad land, talent for our needs? First, we threw open the museum collections and published in Women's Wear and elsewhere information to the designers, advising them of the great facilities before them. Next, a little booklet was prepared showing the technical details of mechanical pattern making. And finally, a few $100s set aside in prizes by Women's Wear, and a nationwide contest in design originated with the assistance of the art schools in America. Oh, fascinating. Sure, I wonder if Andy Warhol read this book. There is no telling. Andy Warhol is such an enigma. Such a weird guy. There's no telling. And, and maybe the tomato soup can or the tomato can, maybe it's just it's taken on a different meaning for us because of Warhol, but maybe that was just an example of a blah thing back in the day, and he took off on that. I don't know. The first jury met in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the early winter of 1916. What else was happening in 1916? Marie Webster had just published her book in 1915. 1916 is when Dr. Dunton hangs his first quilt show at Shepherd Pratt. And it was just for the nurses and the patients, but people came out of the woodwork. And I want to say this little quilt show was only up it was a couple days. It wasn't even a week. And he was quite surprised. So this is happening the same year. I well remember the closing hours, with a blizzard raging outside, when the belated artists brought their bundles of designs to my laboratory in the American Museum of Natural History. I can still recall my anxiety, for until the last 3 days, there was nothing to prove that all our plans and preparations were not in vain. More than the mere success and failure of a plan was at stake. I had to reckon with the enthusiasm of men in a project from which they themselves had neither hope nor expectation of reward. So, of course, these are all men. If a lady's name is mentioned, you'll have to pick me up off the floor, because I doubt any women were involved. Now, with the WPA project, those designers, there were women that came out there, but something tells me this is just going to be men. Dr. Clark Whistler of the American Museum of Natural History had said, "It is a source of wonder to me that our textile designers have not made freer use of the collections under my care. Certainly they should serve as wonderful inspiration." Well, if people don't know what you got, man, how do they know? How do they know that they can come look at it and use it as inspiration? In this connection, it may be said that lectures were given in the American Museum of Natural History and the Metropolitan Museum of Art by distinguished scholars on the problems of decorative art and by technical experts on the relation of the machine to design. Now, I'm really interested about this little booklet that was prepared showing the technical designs of mechanical pattern making. I'm guessing women's wear, it's their publication. So wonder if we could track that down. That'd be really interesting. To these lectures, designers and design students had been freely invited. There had been as well considerable missionary work in the art schools. Missionary work in the art schools. That's an interesting choice of words. Both along the line of research and design and the practical application of design through mechanical methods to fabrics. Henry W. Kent, secretary of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, said, "We have always been anxious to reach the great class of textile designers. Individuals have used our collections for a long time, but as a class, designers have held aloof. The attitude of women's wear in this matter is admirable, and the effort to give expert advice should meet with success." Albert Bloom said, "It is time that America developed a distinctive textile art. The opportunity to study collections in the two museums through these lectures is wonderful." The first jury consisted of Henry W. Kent, Albert Bloom, and the author. A few hundred designs were submitted for our inspection, and of these, about 175 were hung up in an exhibition to which the textile manufacturers were invited. Even in this first trial, the American designer acquitted himself well, or I should have said herself. Okay, there were women. Well, okay, here I go, picking myself up off the floor. There were women, although he's not going to mention them, I bet. Most of the prizes went to women. Oh my gosh. Well, I consider myself corrected. That's awesome. Both professionals and amateurs had an equal standing before this jury, but the amateurs won most of the prizes then as later. That's awesome. Most of the prizes went to women. 5 such contests in all were held, the last 4 under the auspices of the Art Alliance of America, which I feel like, have I heard of this? I think I've heard of it. The AAA, not the American Automobile Association, but the Art Alliance of America, who generously donated their rooms for the annual showing and took care of the details of the contests. Beginning with the second contest, certain individuals in the industry made generous contributions, and many expert judges of design either served on the jury or acted in an advisory capacity. The last of these exhibitions was held in 1920, and over 1,000 artists, representing 34 states and Canada, sent in 3,500 designs and received prizes of over $2,300. In all of these contests, the designs remain the property of the artists. Well, that's new and exciting because, like, at least the magazines we know, they were like, just, pillaging artist stuff. They were never giving attributions, et cetera, et cetera. So it's nice to know these people maintained the rights to their work. So the designs remain the property of the artist, and since all prized designs, as well as many others, always sold, the successful designers received substantial rewards and often a sustained recognition in the industry. A list of the jurors and contributors and the consistently successful artists follows. I'm not going to read these because, I mean, it starts with Henry Kent, Albert Bloom, and then just a bunch of other people. But this is interesting. These are some illustrations, very 1920s looking, just from a variety of exhibitions and women's wear and so on. So now these illustrations here, particularly this one, if you are familiar with folkwear patterns, I have made a number of articles of clothing out of their patterns, but their illustrations look like that. They look like these 1920s, 1930s type of, and I don't even know what you would call that type of illustration. I don't know what style it is, but it looks very similar to the folkwear illustrations. Who illustrated the book? Well, are you talking about these pictures? These are specific to, so about half of these are from women's wear. Like that's the design poster for the contest. And then these are from the magazine. And then these are the design, the design research rooms at the Brooklyn Institute Museum, yeah. So, I like this one. I don't think I didn't show that one close up. Look, it's kind of like a crazy quilt, or sort of not really even a crazy quilt. It's sort of like a collage made of of fabric design, and then in the center, it's like a ship. I don't know if you can see that very well. Good stuff. Okay. So there's this whole list of artists. I'm just scanning here to see if I recognize any last names. Alice Hurd. That's an interesting one because Hurd. Because the Hurds are people that are connected with Dr. Dunton. Although I'm guessing it's probably not the same Hurds. So. Oh yeah, Druid. All of the images in this book are things he's gotten from the museums or women's wear. So, okay. Very early in these contests, it was discovered that many talented designers had greater facility in working out their ideas on actual fabrics than on paper. Oh, that's interesting. A supplementary competition was therefore arranged, known as the Albert Bloom Exhibition of Hand-Decorated Fabrics. And many of the most beautiful designs were developed in this way. Hand craftsmanship was found to be of the greatest importance in the problem of design, and this we should have known from the history of ornament as well as from practical experience. So, I think I'm going to leave off there. Because then he's getting into some exhibitions. Yeah. So these are getting into the exhibition. So we can pick up there on Thursday. And I think if I don't pick a topic that makes me very long-winded, we could definitely finish this chapter on Thursday. Yeah, it's like the longest chapter in the book. It's probably twice as long as the other chapters. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Tomorrow night on Quilt Nerding, Jill and I will be interviewing our friend Alicia. So, looks like how they showed fabrics in the Montgomery Ward's catalog. Yes, like what it's like, kind of like it's not really a collage. It's like they cut them out and they sort of were like a shape, right? So yes, tomorrow night, if you can, come 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be in interviewing our friend Alicia, who is the executive director of the Virginia Quilt Museum. And of course, we've got all kinds of great questions for her, like how'd you get this cool ass job? And what's a weird thing that people do in quilt museums? So she's going to spill all the dirt. So definitely come if you can. If you're not available, tune in because it'll be on the Quilt Nerding live streams on our YouTube. 7 p.m. Eastern. And let's see. Let me grab the link for you before I go. Man, I'm so sorry I keep clearing my throat, you guys. It's been one of those, it's the weather or something, just loves to make me all crackly. So, there's the link. Oh, crud. So why is this not letting me? Okay, hold on a sec. There we go. So there's the link. And then we're at 7 p.m. Eastern. So, yeah. And like I said, if you can't make it, definitely just keep an eye out on that link. And it goes up right after we're done. So you'll be able to watch it later on. So with that in mind, I will see you guys soon. Have a wonderful week. And stay warm or dry or not on fire. I don't know what's going on in the world. There's all kinds of craziness. So take good care of yourselves. Stitch happily. All right, guys. I'll talk to you later. Mwah!